The moment my sister placed the steaming plates on the table, I felt a chill run down my spine. My husband, paralyzed from a recent accident, sat in his chair, staring at the food like it had betrayed him. I reached for a fork and his voice cut through the room like lightning. "Don't touch the food, you need to see this first." I froze. My stomach dropped. Every muscle in my body went tense. I didn't know whether to be angry, confused, or terrified. Only if this story speaks to your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me the city or country you're watching from and your local time. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 30 years old. Tonight was supposed to be a simple family dinner, but it became the night everything in our house shifted. The room smelled of roasted chicken and garlic, the kind of smell that normally makes me feel safe, but tonight it felt like a trap. My sister, Sarah, smiled nervously, unaware of the tension she'd walked into, and I could feel my mother-in-law, Linda, sitting stiffly on the couch, her eyes darting between Michael and me as if waiting for the disaster to unfold. My father-in-law, Robert, was quietly observing from the corner, arms crossed, his jaw tight, giving nothing away. I tried to steady my shaking hands, telling myself I was overreacting, but the fear in Michael's gaze told me I wasn't. His lips quivered and he barely whispered, "Trust me." The innocence of the evening, the laughter, the clinking of cutlery, the soft hum of conversation, collapsed instantly into silence. I remembered the mornings when Michael first returned home from the hospital, the way his eyes had begged for help, and how I had promised him everything would be normal again. And now, facing the potential of disaster in our own kitchen, I realized how fragile that promise was. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stop, to wait, to understand before acting. I could see my sister's confusion, my husband's panic, and the weight of my own indecision pressing down on me. This wasn't just dinner. This was a test, a moment that would define how I protected the man I loved and what kind of family we truly were. And as the tension tightened like a vice around my chest, I took a deep breath, trying to steady my mind and body because I knew I had to remember every detail, every second, if I was going to prevent a tragedy that could change all of our lives forever. But before I could act, before I could even process the fear, I remembered something from months ago, something small that now felt monumental, and I realized that everything we had built, every meal, every careful routine, every promise led to this exact moment. This is where the night began. And this is where I learned that sometimes the smallest warnings hold the biggest truths. I could feel my hands trembling as I stepped closer to the table, the steam rising from the dishes making it hard to breathe. Michael's eyes were wide, his pupils dilated, and every muscle in his body was rigid despite the paralysis. Sarah was hovering behind me, her fork paused in the air, looking between us with confusion and a hint of worry she had never shown before. I tried to steady my heartbeat, telling myself to focus, to think clearly, but my mind was racing with 1,000 scenarios. What could be so urgent that he had to stop us from eating right now? I glanced at the roasted chicken, perfectly browned, the mashed potatoes smooth and creamy, the green beans glistening with butter, and for a moment I almost reached for the fork again, forgetting the terror in Michael's voice. I caught myself just in time, my body frozen in place, my breath shallow. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, every second stretching out longer than the last. Michael's lips moved, barely audible. "Look at the table closely, Emily." I leaned in, my eyes scanning every detail. I noticed the salad dressing had been replaced with something I did not recognize. The edges of the plate slightly chipped in a way I had never seen. The water glasses tipped slightly as if someone had moved them deliberately. My stomach churned. My mind screamed that this was not an accident, that someone had done this on purpose. I felt anger rising alongside fear. How could Sarah, who always acted so helpful, have missed this? Had she even noticed the signs? I shook my head, trying to regain control. "Michael, what is happening?" I whispered. His hand twitched toward a small envelope tucked under the napkin. I reached for it hesitantly, my fingers brushing against the paper. The moment I lifted it, a photo fell out, showing a delivery receipt with a timestamp that did not match the dinner preparations. My pulse quickened, my vision blurred with a mix of shock and disbelief. My legs felt weak, threatening to buckle under me. Sarah stepped closer, finally sensing the gravity of the moment, but I barely registered her presence. My husband's eyes met mine, conveying urgency and fear all at once. He mouthed the words, "Check the fridge." I moved cautiously, opening the door to see a container marked with a warning label, one I had never seen before. My hands shook uncontrollably as I realized that if we had eaten, the consequences could have been immediate and severe. I took a step back, my mind racing through every prior dinner, every time I had assumed safety and ignored subtle cues, and now it had led to this instant of life or death clarity. My chest tightened, my throat dry, and I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. The air in the room seemed heavier, charged with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to act. I swallowed hard, forcing my thoughts to sharpen, knowing I had to make decisions quickly. I could see my mother-in-law leaning forward, her eyes wide, her expression a mixture of disbelief and judgment. I felt the injustice of being put in a position where a simple meal could become a disaster, the frustration of having to process it alone, while everyone else seemed calm and unaware. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I carefully assessed the situation, every sense on high alert, every nerve ending screaming at me to understand before any movement. I thought of the nights Michael had struggled alone, of the countless times I had been told to trust him, to rely on my instincts, and now all of that preparation, all of that attention to detail mattered more than ever. I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, heavier than any object in the room, heavier than the plates, heavier than the fear itself. And in that moment, amidst the polished silverware and the glowing overhead light, I realized that our family dynamics, the patterns we had long ignored, and the subtle signals from the ones we loved most were all converging into this single critical moment. Everything I had known about trust, about vigilance, about the fragile balance of care and danger, crystallized into a single truth. One wrong move could unravel everything. The room held its breath with me, the silence amplifying every heartbeat, every whispered thought, every decision dangling in the air like a fragile thread. And I knew, deep in my core, that whatever came next would mark the night as a turning point, the moment when the ordinary became extraordinary, and when the smallest actions carried consequences far beyond what any of us could have imagined. This was no longer just dinner. It was a test, a revelation, and a wake-up call all at once. My hands shook as I carefully reached for the container Michael had pointed out, my mind racing with every possible outcome. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent, filling the room with its rhythm, matching the tension that wrapped around the table like an invisible chain. Sarah shifted nervously behind me, clearly aware that this was no ordinary evening, that something was profoundly wrong, yet unsure how to help. I opened the lid slowly, my eyes scanning the contents, and I froze. The food inside was clearly labeled with instructions that I had never seen before, warning of a preparation error that could have been disastrous. I could feel a wave of disbelief and frustration surge through me. How could something as simple as dinner turn into a near catastrophe? I glanced at my husband, his eyes locked on mine, conveying a mix of relief and urgency. Every detail mattered. The placement of each dish, the timing of each step, the fact that I had almost unknowingly put our lives at risk. I thought of all the times I had trusted routine and overlooked subtle warnings, and now those oversights had nearly cost us dearly. Sarah's face was pale, her hands twisting the napkin she held, and for the first time I noticed the depth of my sister's involvement, the assumption that nothing could ever go wrong because she had done everything perfectly in her mind. I realized then that perfection is never a guarantee, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that vigilance is the only safeguard when someone you love is vulnerable. My mother-in-law cleared her throat quietly, a small sound that broke the silence but did not alleviate the tension. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, yet filled with a mixture of worry and disbelief. I understood her perspective, the way she had watched us over the years, yet she could not feel the immediacy of the moment as I did, standing inches from potential disaster. My body felt tense, coiled, every nerve alive, as I processed the instructions on the container. It was a delicate balance of chemicals and ingredients, a combination that required precise attention, and any deviation could have been harmful. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself, and made the decision to follow every step methodically, my mind zeroing in on the task as though it were a lifeline. The room remained silent, every breath echoing in my ears, as if time had slowed, stretching the seconds into minutes of unbearable suspense. Michael's gaze never left mine, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and responsibility resting on my shoulders. I could feel the weight of years of family dynamics, of being overlooked, of always needing to prove my capability, and it all converged into this one moment of critical focus. I realized that my fear, my shaking hands, my racing thoughts, were not weaknesses but signals that demanded my full attention and precision. Each movement I made was deliberate, careful, conscious, because I knew that the consequences of carelessness could be immediate and irreversible. And as I moved through the steps, following the instructions exactly, I felt a growing sense of clarity and control amid the chaos, a realization that preparation, vigilance, and attention to detail could turn a near disaster into a moment of triumph. My mind replayed every past meal, every minor oversight, every assumption I had made, and now it all served as a lesson, a preparation for the moment at hand. The container's lid finally replaced, everything in its proper place, I stepped back and exhaled slowly, my body still trembling but a fragile calm beginning to settle. I looked at Michael, saw the relief in his eyes, and knew that for the first time our teamwork, our communication, and our awareness had prevented a potential tragedy. Sarah exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly, and even my mother-in-law allowed herself a small nod of acknowledgement. In that silent exchange, I understood that this night would be remembered not for the dinner itself, but for the heightened awareness, the urgent lessons, and the fragile thread of responsibility that had kept us safe. And as I stood there absorbing the weight of the experience, I felt the first stirrings of gratitude for vigilance, foresight, and the trust that had allowed me to navigate the moment successfully, realizing that the smallest actions, when guided by care and attention, can have the largest impact. I stepped back from the table, my legs unsteady, my mind replaying every warning and every clue that had brought me to this critical moment. The room was heavy with silence, and even the faint hum of the refrigerator felt amplified, echoing the tension that had gripped the space. Michael's eyes never left mine, conveying a gratitude and urgency that words could not capture. Sarah finally exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly, the first sign that she recognized the severity of what had almost occurred. I glanced around the room, noting my mother-in-law's gaze, sharp yet softened by relief, and realized how fragile the balance of trust and awareness truly was in our household. I could feel my own chest rising and falling, each breath a reminder of the responsibility I had carried, the weight of decisions made in moments of panic. Every past incident where I had ignored small signals now crystallized into clarity. Each oversight had been a lesson that led to this point. I carefully moved the container back into the refrigerator, locking in place every precaution, ensuring nothing would be disturbed before we were ready. I felt my fingers relax just slightly as I turned to Michael, who gave me a subtle nod, acknowledging both the danger and the survival, and in that quiet exchange, an unspoken bond deepened between us. Sarah stepped closer, her hands clasped together, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine recognition, an understanding that the smallest actions could have monumental consequences. The dining room, once filled with the aroma of food and the anticipation of a simple family meal, now carried the weight of near disaster, a testament to the importance of vigilance and presence of mind. I moved to adjust the table, checking each plate, each glass, ensuring the environment was safe and controlled, my mind sharp and alert, aware that every detail mattered. My gaze shifted to Michael again, and I noticed a small smile, faint but unmistakable, the relief of a crisis avoided washing over him. It was a moment of profound gratitude, the realization that preparation and attention had preserved safety and prevented harm. I felt my body relax incrementally, though the adrenaline lingered, a reminder of the intense focus required to navigate the situation. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet, respectful, and filled with understanding, acknowledging the gravity of what had just occurred and her role in it. I nodded in response, silently communicating that while the crisis had passed, the lessons remained vivid and impactful. The rest of the evening unfolded with a cautious calm, the family adjusting to the shift in awareness, recognizing that a simple meal could carry unforeseen consequences, and that care and attentiveness were essential in every interaction. I reflected on the years of family dynamics, the patterns of oversight, and the assumptions that had previously guided our actions, realizing that tonight had changed everything. From the smallest detail of the food placement to the subtle instructions hidden in plain sight, I understood that vigilance was not just about caution but about valuing life and the people around us. The room settled into a quiet rhythm, the hum of appliances and the soft lighting marking the passage of time, as I internalized the depth of the experience. The awareness, the acute attention, and the recognition of responsibility became etched in my mind, a lesson in the importance of observation, trust, and action in moments that could define outcomes. And as the evening continued, I remained hyper-aware, my senses tuned to the environment, every movement deliberate, every decision thoughtful, knowing that the events of tonight would forever shape how I approached even the simplest tasks and interactions, reminding me that vigilance, care, and respect for subtle warnings are often the difference between safety and disaster. I could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on me, each breath a reminder of how close we had come to disaster. Michael's eyes, though still filled with caution, now held a glimmer of relief, and I could see a small, almost imperceptible smile cross his lips. Sarah had stepped back, giving me space, her expression a mix of awe and newfound respect. I realized that this moment was more than just avoiding harm. It was a test of trust, awareness, and teamwork that revealed hidden strengths in all of us. I carefully removed the remaining containers, placing them safely in the refrigerator, double-checking the labels and instructions to ensure that nothing would go wrong in the coming days. My hands were still trembling, my pulse high, but there was a sense of clarity settling over me, a realization that every past warning, every instinct had prepared me for this instant. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift, the tension giving way to cautious calm, but the undercurrent of vigilance remained, a subtle reminder that our responsibility did not end here. I looked at Michael, noting the effort it took for him to remain calm, the way he relied on me to interpret the situation and take action, and I understood the depth of his trust. Sarah finally spoke, her voice soft but steady, acknowledging the gravity of what had nearly occurred, and the role I had played in preventing a catastrophe. I nodded in response, grateful that she now truly saw the stakes and the attention required to navigate them. The room, once charged with near panic, began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though the lessons of the evening were etched into our minds, clear and unyielding. I reflected on the countless dinners, the small oversights, the assumptions that had guided us, and recognized that tonight's events had rewritten our understanding of safety and responsibility. Every movement, every decision, every glance had mattered, and the realization of that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. I could see my mother-in-law's gaze shift, her eyes softened, no longer filled with judgment but with a quiet acknowledgement of the seriousness of the situation and of my ability to navigate it. The air felt lighter, though the adrenaline lingered, a reminder of the heightened awareness necessary to protect those we love. I took a deep breath, grounding myself, and felt a sense of quiet pride in the fact that attentiveness, vigilance, and careful action had allowed us to avoid harm. Michael's hand reached out slightly, touching mine, a gesture of appreciation and reassurance that we were safe. I smiled faintly, knowing that this night would remain etched in our memories as a turning point, a moment when ordinary actions carried extraordinary consequences. As I looked around the table, I realized that the smallest details, the way we handled the food, the attention to labels, the communication between us had made all the difference. And in that moment, amidst the quiet hum of the kitchen, and the gentle clinking of cutlery as we began to settle back into routine, I understood that vigilance and care were not burdens but acts of love, acts that defined the strength and resilience of our family, shaping how we would face every challenge from that point forward. The lessons of tonight, the tension, the fear, and ultimately the relief, would guide us, teaching that even in the simplest of circumstances, attention and thoughtfulness could prevent disaster and strengthen the bonds we shared. Even now, weeks after that dinner, I can still feel the echo of that night in my chest, a reminder of how fragile moments can be, and how quickly life can shift. Our home has returned to a calmer rhythm, the laughter of simple dinners filling the spaces that tension once occupied. Michael and I moved together with a renewed sense of attentiveness, communicating without words, watching for subtle signs, trusting each other more deeply than ever. I have learned to recognize my own boundaries, to honor my instincts, and to assert my presence in a family that once assumed I was invisible. That night taught me that vigilance is an act of love, and that protecting those you care about also means protecting yourself, embracing your right to notice, react, and preserve life. If you are listening to this and feel weighed down by expectations, by family patterns, or by the fear of being unseen, know that your perspective matters, that your voice and your actions can create safety and clarity, and that trusting your intuition is never wrong. I want you to feel seen, understood, and empowered to take up space without guilt, to carve out your own strength even in situations that seem overwhelming. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for allowing me to share these moments that felt so private and urgent, and for letting yourself feel the intensity of the journey alongside me. It means more than I can say to know that you are here, listening, and perhaps finding a little comfort in knowing that none of us are truly alone in facing fear or responsibility. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever felt overlooked or powerless in a moment that demanded all your attention? And what did you do to find your strength? If this story has touched your heart, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more stories that explore resilience, care, and the bonds that define us. Emily Carter, 30, and the core lesson I want to leave you with is, trust your instincts and honor your boundaries.